In our last session we looked at the different reasons why the Roman Empire successfully invaded Britain, and on the screen you can see an image of the emperor who ruled Rome at that time. So my first question to you is, can you remember who the Roman emperor was when Rome successfully invaded and conquered Britain? Pause the video, share your answer with someone, and come and join me when you're ready. Well remembered, the emperor of the Roman Empire when they conquered Britain was in fact Claudius. And the successful invasion by the Roman Empire took place in 43 AD, almost 100 years after Julius Caesar had first tried to invade Britain. In this session we're going to be trying to answer the question of who was in Britain when the Romans invaded. So we're going to be finding out who was in Britain at this time, and we're going to be finding out a little bit about what their way of life was like. And before we start exploring this question, let's see what we know already. So think about these two questions. Do you know who lived in Britain before the Romans invaded? Think about some previous work you might have done about Britain and the people who lived there. And then your second question is, what do you think daily life was like in Britain before the Romans invaded? So I want you to pause the video and think about these two questions. Then find someone to share your ideas with before you come back and rejoin us. So before the Romans invaded, Britain was home to a group of people who we now call the Celts. However, they weren't known as the Celts at this time. The Romans simply referred to them as Britons. During the Iron Age, between about 750 BC and 12 BC, the Celts were one of the most powerful groups of people in the whole of Europe, and they had people living in countries like France, Switzerland and Belgium, as well as Britain. Now of course back at this time we didn't have anything such as cameras, so these are artists' impressions of what the Celts might have looked like at this time. So taking a look at these pictures, what do you think the Celts were like? And what words would you use to describe them? So pause the video for a few moments and I want you to think about these two questions and come up with some ideas. So what do you think, based on these pictures, the Celts were like? And if I was to push you for some words to describe them, what words do you think you would use? So pause the video and come and join me when you're ready to share some ideas. So now we've shared our first impressions of these Celts, these early Britons. Let's find out a little bit more about them. Rather than classing themselves as one people, one population, as we do in today's world, Celts class themselves as smaller groups, and they lived in these groups which they called tribes. So a tribe that would live in one place would class themselves as a different type of person than a tribe that might live down the road. They lived in small round houses, like the one that you can see on the screen, and these were made from wattle and daub. This is branches woven together and coated with mud, clay and straw to insulate them. And they would have had a thatched roof, which would have made from straw or heather. Now within the tribe they would have had several of these round houses, and they would have been put together as a small village. They'd have had a fence around them to keep out intruders and wild animals, as well as keeping in their own animals. Now the Celts didn't have any large towns or cities, they simply lived in these village communities. Now taking a look at this image on the screen, can you notice the skull above the door? Now Celts thought that the head was very important, and the skulls of the dead were respected and even worshipped at times. Now one of the big differences between early man in Stone Age times through to the Iron Age and now into the Roman period was their change from being nomadic. That means they wander around with no base, sort of looking for food, and they became someone that set camp in one particular place and started to grow their own food. Now most Celts were farmers like this, and they grew vegetables such as leeks, onions, turnips, parsnips and carrots. and they also grew grains to make into bread and porridge. They would still gather, so they would still go out into the forests and the woods and gather berries and nuts, and they would hunt wild animals such as deer, boar, foxes and bears. However, now they were actually keeping domesticated animals. They would have animals they would purposely keep for meat, milk and wool, so they would actually keep goats, sheep and pigs, just as farmers did today. And we can see on the screen, this is a kernstone, and they would use this as a mill to grind up grains, and this would be the thing that would have given them a flour to make their bread. Now, thinking about the sort of food they would eat, what do you think of a Celtic diet? Would you have been happy to have eaten this sort of food? Or would you be wanting something slightly more contemporary in your diet? On this image you can see a little bit more about the clothing that a Celt would have worn, and the clothes that they wore would have shown their status and importance within the tribe. Now, these clothes would have been created using wool on something called a loom, which is a bit like a spinning wheel, a bit like the sort of things you might imagine from Rapunzel when they spun the straw into gold. They would colour the cloth from natural dyes, so they would use things like plants and berries to give it different colours. Men would wear a long tunic over trousers with a belt and a cloak, while women wore long skirts or dresses and shawls over the top. The shoes that they wore would have been made from leather. An important member of the tribe would have worn a piece of jewellery called a torque, which was a neck ring made from twisted metal and decorated with patterns. So that's how historians see the Celts today. But how did the Romans see the Celts when they came over to Britain? Now, this man you can see on the screen is a Roman historian. His name's Diodorus Siculus, and he described the appearance of the Celts. He said, "They are very tall in stature, with rippling muscles under clear white skin. Their hair is blonde, but not naturally so. They bleach it, washing it in lime and combing it back from their foreheads. They look like wood demons, their hair thick and shaggy like a horse's mane. Some of them are clean-shaven, but others, especially those of high rank, shave their cheeks but leave a moustache that covers the whole mouth. The way they dress is astonishing. They wear brightly coloured and embroidered shirts, with trousers called braccae, and cloaks fastened at the shoulder with a brooch. Heavy in winter, light in summer. These cloaks are striped or checkered in design, with separate checks close together and in various colours." Now, one thing we know about the Celts comes directly from Julius Caesar himself, who describes them as fearless warriors. However, due to the fact that the Celts lived in tribes rather than as a whole country, these tribes were often at war with each other, and this was actually one of the main reasons why the Romans were able to conquer Britain. The Celts were fighting so much amongst themselves they were unable to work together against the Romans. And if you remember from our previous session, we talked about how the Romans had this ability to fight as one. So there was no weak link within the ranks. The Celts, on the other hand, would have really struggled to have a tribe from one place fighting alongside another, even if they were fighting for a common goal. So how might history be different if the Celtic tribes had not fought with each other quite as much? So now we've discovered a little bit about what life would have been like for the people who lived in Britain before the Roman invasion. We're now going to be able to use some different sources to find out about Celtic daily life, and about what life would have been like if you had lived there. So for this activity, you're going to be completing the questions on this non-chronological report using a variety of different sources. Now, you can go onto the internet, or you could go and find some books for yourself, or maybe speak to people who you know slightly more about this topic than you do. Or some of these answers you might be able to think of straight away. However, should you be getting stuck on any of these, you'll also find an information sheet on the website, which hopefully will have quite a lot of the information that you'll be looking for. So with this one, it's a case of reading through it and identifying the information that you think is relevant to those questions. So now you're ready to begin your independent activity. I'm just going to leave you with this final question to think about while you're getting ready to do that. What do you think Britain might have been like today if the Romans had not been successful at invading the country? So how do you think the country would have been today if the Roman Empire had never managed to invade? If, just like Julius Caesar, Claudius himself had failed in his attempt? So think about that question, and good luck with your independent work, and I look forward to seeing your non-chronological reports. Good luck.